Hello there guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back for another video. I hope you're all doing very well today. And today, well, we're going to be talking about a pretty big topic, a more informal type video as these ones normally are, but I feel it is big enough that it really does need to be talked about because it's worrying. And what we're going to be talking about today is obviously physical media, that it's on the precipice, the reality that it's becoming, more and more apparent over the years that physical media is dying. And that was brought into the spotlight once again following a statement from the director of subscriptions over at Ubisoft around about 5 days ago. So this guy, Philippe Tremblay, I'm gonna mostly paraphrase this, he was mostly talking about the idea of people becoming used to not owning CDs and DVD collections, and then he moved it over to video games, and he said, as gamers grow comfortable in that aspect, you don't lose your progress. If you resume your game at another time, your progress file is still there. That's not been deleted. So he's referring to the worries of people losing their progress if a platform goes down. He carried on, he said, you don't lose what you've built in the game or your engagement with the game, so it's about feeling comfortable with not owning your game. Now again, this was in regards to subscription-based gaming, which is a massive part of our lives, and let's be honest, this whole idea of moving away from physical media to digital has been happening for years. It's already happening, we know it's happening. Ask any PC gamer, I can't remember the last time that I bought a physical PC game. Everything is digitized, everything is on Steam or GOG or Jordan, whatever that may be. My library of games is always on some sort of periphery, a third-party platform. And the whole idea here is that when you buy a game on Steam, you are merely buying the license to access the software. You're not actually owning it, and that's becoming more apparent even on console nowadays, as when you buy, say, the physical boxes, you're not actually buying the game. You're once again only purchasing the license to access the software. It's not the game itself. How many games nowadays have that internet requirement at the bottom, or they have that install required? Because they're effectively trying to make sure that you have a legitimate copy of the game. So you're not actually buying a physical game, you're buying a physical license. And it's just slowly creeped up over the years, and my biggest concern with this whole shift from physical to digital, is that in my head, and I hate to say this, it's just an inevitability that eventually we will be in a digital-only age. And one reason why I personally feel it is inevitable is because there is, a generational shift between those of us who grew up with physical games, who grew up with buying the boxes which had the manuals, heck, even the manuals were journeys in of themselves back in those days. Having the physical game, being able to just pop it into your console, whatever it may be, PS1, Nintendo 64, SNES, whatever you want to call it, and then just being able to play the game, no questions asked, no strings attached. There's a divide between those of us who grew up like that, and a divide between those who are growing up right now, who are used to not owning anything, who are used to subscription-based services. I mean, heck, how many things are subscription-based nowadays? I mean, not just gaming. Look at stuff like Twitch, Amazon Prime, Spotify, Apple Music, all of them subscription-based. Heck, even cars. Even cars are subscription-based nowadays. I mean, I think there was an article that came out in regards to Mercedes with one of their newer models, and you buy the car, and all of the technology is there. Everything. This is what's crazy to me. The technology is on the car, but there is a paywall to access some of those features. Some people are coining it now as, instead of pay to win, they're calling it pay to live, because the slippery slope is that when does that start to encroach onto, the safety of the drivers or the passengers? Like, I hate to break it to you, these companies do not care about your lives. They definitely don't. There is a guy in a suit somewhere who will look at every profit maximizing scheme he can think of, and eventually it will start to encroach onto the safety of the person. It's not happening at the moment, but it would not surprise me if that does eventually happen. They do not care about the lives of those people, they only care about the money that's going in their pocket. But in regards to cars, say, heated seats, £200 a year please. Remote ignition, £150 a year please. And it just keeps going like that. It's still crazy to me just thinking about that. Everything is there, you can't access it. Like, it's absolutely crazy to me. I can't believe we're actually living in a world like that. But anyway, bringing it back to gaming. Digital gaming. I don't think digital gaming is the devil or anything like that. I think digital gaming does have a place in this day and age. Having a massive library of games that's not taking up any of my space in just a list that I can access at any time that I really want to. I might need to download it, but it's all there ready to go. It's great. But digital gaming should not be the fulcrum or the replacement for physical gaming. Never. Not in my opinion. Physical gaming and digital gaming should be working in tandem with each other to provide the best experience to both types of people. Some people will prefer digital, some people will prefer physical. That's just the way it is. I personally will always prefer physical, and the reason I prefer physical is because of the potential drawbacks of a digital-only future. You know, if Steam goes down, if GOG goes down, all of my games go with it. I won't be able to access them in any way unless I've somehow managed to extrapolate them from the platform and put them onto my PC on a separate drive. And people saying that it will never happen, well, it did happen. It happened last year, January 2023. Remember Stadia? Completely gone January the 18th. The service shut down. But granted, Google, to their credit, did work with publishers and developers and players to get full refunds for not only the hardware but for the games that they purchased. I think the only things that weren't refunded were the subscriptions that were paid, but in the grand scheme of things, even though Stadia shut down, the actual loss was negligible because people did get their money back. If they went through the process, they got their money back, probably got to play a lot of games for free, and then they moved on with their lives. But the question is, would that goodwill gesture happen if it was another company? Don't forget, we're talking about Google here, one of the most powerful companies in the world, who have pretty much close to infinite resources available to them. Would that goodwill from developers and publishers extend to a smaller fish like, say, Steam? Well, Valve, shall I say, are a big company, but they're not as big as Google. Could they do the same thing as Google did with Stadia? I'm not so sure. And then obviously there's stuff like licensing issues, there's cases of where Steam has been around for a very long time, they have archives of games built up over decades. If that kind of thing did happen again, God forbid, I don't know if they'd be able to do the same thing as Google did. At the end of the day, you'll probably lose everything. I believe there was a statement from Valve saying that they would work with developers and publishers to get people refunded if it ever did happen, but words becoming action is not as easy as it seems. Anyway, bringing it back to the gaming side of things, and it really did touch a sore spot for a lot of people, myself included. And I think what exasperated it further is that it was pincered by two big events either side of the statement being made. On one side of the spectrum, back in October 2023, there were pictures at Best Buy showing that they were phasing out physical media. Now, at a later point, Best Buy did come out and clarify the situation and say that they were still committed to physical gaming. But they were moving away from physical DVDs and CDs and all this kind of stuff, but games will remain for the time being. But regardless, physical media being phased out. And then very recently, in fact, only last week, there was another big news story over in the UK where Game stated that they were moving away from selling used games, basically dissolving their exchange-based program that had been around for years. Now, Game is the big one for me, and that's the one I want to dive into a little bit more because it does hit a bit close to home, that one. For anyone who doesn't know, Game is pretty much the UK equivalent of GameSpot. It's the biggest video game-based retailer in the UK, and it has been for years. For as long as I have been alive, Game has existed. And it was always an adventure, a different experience going into Game. It was always exciting going in there. You would go in, and when I was like 4 years old, you would have maybe a massive display dedicated to Nintendo, a massive one dedicated to PlayStation at the back, and then you would have another one dedicated to, say, I don't know, whatever the third one would be, Sega, Dreamcast, and maybe a PC area as well with some strategy guides. That was pretty much it. It was just games all the time, and you would go over to your chosen section, you would look, you would see Lilac Wars up above, which was Star Fox 64, that's what we had it in the UK, that's what it was named in the UK. You had Lilac Wars, you had Mario Kart 64 on your left, you had Super Mario 64 right in front of you, Ocarina of Time to your right. Amazing games that you could just pick up, go to the counter, and it was yours. You were off. And it wasn't just that. I mean, even if you weren't going to buy a game. Like, I remember I was 4 years old, I was stuck on Super Mario 64, I didn't know how to take out the big Whomp at the top of Whomp's Fortress. So when we went to town, me and my dad, we dropped into the game store, went to the guy behind the counter, and just asked him. This was before the internet was a big thing, and we're talking to this bloke, and he says, oh yeah, you just jump onto the back of him and ground pound him. It's like, there you go. It was just a different world. It was just gamers talking to gamers, talking about games. It was great. But over the years, Game, like I say, was the biggest UK-based retailer. It probably still is at the moment of video games, but it's been on a steady decline ever since. It was bought out by the Fraser Group, and then it basically gobbled up all of its competition like GameStation and all this kind of stuff, but then it just, I'd say it peaked in the mid-2000s, and then it's just been on a steady trajectory down over the years. And in the present day, the shops of game, or the floor spaces of game, have been relegated to sports-based clothing retailers like Sports Direct. That's exactly what's happened in my one. It's now just relegated to the corner of a Sports Direct, and you would have no idea it was there even if you were looking for it. The signposts are dreadful to get there, and when you get there, it's maybe a sixth of the floor space that it used to be. And then even worse is that when you actually get into the store, or actually into the game floor space, there's no door anymore or anything like that, no entrance. But once you actually get onto the floor space, I'd say about 60% of it is dedicated to other stuff. Not the video games themselves. I'd say 60% of it is miscellaneous stuff like gaming peripheries, figures, trading cards. You might have one shelf dedicated to Nintendo, you might have one shelf dedicated to Xbox, and one shelf dedicated to PlayStation, PS4 and PS5. That's it. There's nothing else there. The rest of it is all toys and board games and all this kind of stuff. And I feel that this here, or the failing of game over the years, is attributed to two things. First of all, they got too complacent with their position as the #1 game retailer in the UK. And then second of all, and probably the more important one, is that they just don't care that much about physical media anymore. On the side that they got too complacent, well, in the case of their used game service, what would happen is that if you went to a game and you saw their used game section, more often than not, I'd say about 1 in, say, 8 games, you could buy cheaper, brand new, than getting it from game. It was crazy. Like, there was a real lack of quality control, keeping it up to date, and it was no wonder that they had massive throws of stock that were just stuck there because of this. They basically reaped the rewards of not giving it its due diligence. And it's crazy to me because the exchange program was such a big profit driver for game back in the day. They would give you generally a pittance for the stuff that you brought back. Like when I brought back my GameCube, I think I got £50 for all of the games that I gave back to them, and the console, and the controllers, the memory cards. Everything I gave to them was 50 quid, which is probably the worst deal I've ever done in the past. I want to go back in time and slap myself and give myself my GameCube and my games back. But anyway, they would generally get it for a pittance and then sell it on for a massive markup, and it worked for game for years and years and years, but then they just became so negligent with it. You know, now they've straight up dissolved it. And then on the other side of it, the idea that they just don't care about physical games anymore. I mean, that pretty much is shown in the offerings they have in the store itself. Like I say, 60% of it dedicated to miscellaneous items. The video games have just taken a back seat to that. It shows to me personally that game as a store or as an entity, it's just given up on the physical market as a whole. It doesn't see any opportunity there, and that seems to be mirrored by developers and publishers alike, at least in this current age. And the thing is that now, when it comes to shopping for games, I very rarely go to Game. I think that I've bought 2 games from Game in the past maybe 2 years, maybe? And that was Super Mario RPG and, God, what was the other one I bought? Super Mario RPG and then something from the year before that. The rest of the time, I just go to the far superior CEX, or SEX, which is just better in every way. I found stuff like my Skies of Arcadia there, I found Xenoblade Chronicles 2 Limited Edition, I found a ton of awesome DS games, and, you know, Legend of Dragoon was there in a sealed copy. You know, it's just a superior shopping experience. It's basically everything that Game used to be. And more often than not, if I'm going shopping for games, I go to SEX. I never go to Game unless I'm, say, buying some trading cards or something like that, buying some Magic cards or Yu-Gi-Oh cards, whatever that may be. But the point is that when it comes to games, I don't go to Game anymore. And it's sad because Game has existed for as long as I've lived. I remember in its heyday you would see maybe 2 to 3 stores on any given high street within maybe, I'd say, 100 meters of each other. Nowadays you're lucky to see 1 in a big town centre. And I think that this shift away from physical gaming to digital gaming is one real issue that has been affecting game stores like Game for many years now. But let's bring it back now to the digital-only future and the threat against physical games. If there's one thing that is going to happen from this, if there's one certainty from this angle that we're going down, it is that piracy is going to increase. I can already see the logic that some people are going to use. If I buy a game and I don't own it, then if I pirate it, then I'm not stealing it. That's exactly what will happen. Players will turn to piracy. You're going to see a big upsurge in that. Players will find a way to air their grievances. That's just the case of it. And even if they don't want to turn to piracy, in some cases players are forced to do so. Or at least they're forced into emulation. And this here, for me, is the biggest reason why physical gaming needs to remain into the future. Physical media must remain because it counters the one thing that developers and publishers are just failing at miserably, which is game preservation. There was an article last month which said something like 90% of retro games are not available on modern platforms. And you know, from the articles I see monthly, it's a momentous day when a classic RPG is brought to a digital platform. We got the Golden Sun duology, hooray! But it should never be like that, especially for a classic game like the original Golden Sun. Classic game. That should be available to everyone. Whether it be through a subscription-based service like dedicated to retro games, or whether it's just on the platform and available for people to just purchase separately. These games, these classic games, should be available. There are many people who prefer the classics, who prefer the retro, whether it be through nostalgia, whether it be through the gameplay which they feel is superior, whatever that may be, they should have the option to play it. Now, if those options are not available, as they so often are, the only alternative in many cases is to simply purchase the physical version. You need the hardware, and then you need the game itself, which in some cases can be a massive drain on the pocket. We've seen it. Skies of Arcadia, Panzer Dragoon Saga, Xenosaga Episode 3. Good luck finding those games for the standard price of a new release. You're going to be spending around about 200 quid for some of those. Panzer Dragoon Saga, I think, I think it was £1,000 at one point. It's insane. Which is crazy. Even Skies of Arcadia, but Skies of Arcadia Legends I bought, which was a good price, 80 quid. That sells you a lot. £80 for a game that released in what? Like 2002, 2003 for the GameCube? £80 for that, and that's a good price. Now, what I'm saying is it may not be an issue today, but let's say 20 years down the line we go fully digital, but game preservation as a topic remains an afterthought for many of these publishers and developers. How will the vast majority get to play those classics? They won't, unless they can emulate them. And a lot of people don't really want to get into emulation, or they don't have the hardware to emulate. In the past at least, owning a game meant you could pick it up whenever you want it, slot it in, and off you go. Heck, I still play Pokemon Silver once in a blue moon on the cartridge I bought over 2 decades ago. I don't play it often, but it's there if I get the urge to do so. Out of my personal feeling that Gen 2 is the best Pokemon generation. I had so many great memories tied to that game. And this is why I will always advocate for physical media. And I hope that my side of that has been clear, but I'm going to summarise that as we round it out now. Physical media must remain. Digital gaming has its place, there's no doubt about that, it has its place, but physical media cannot be removed in lieu of that. Physical games give me the chance to play older titles that I couldn't hope to find elsewhere unless I was willing to pay some sort of subscription for a service that I'll likely never use outside of a couple of sessions. But physical gaming also has a deeper meaning to me. It's my history through gaming, my archive through gaming. Every game I've played has a story to tell, and each physical case that I open up is a book into those experiences. I am effectively the curator of my own gaming history, and I personally like having the option of perusing it whenever I choose to do so. But there it is, guys, that's my whole thoughts on this physical debacle. Put your thoughts in the comments below, what you guys think about this. Is it worrying? Do you think it's an inevitability that eventually we will end up in a digital only future? Let us know, but for now, I'll see you in the next video. Peace.